Good evening. I'm really happy to discuss the motion of the 89 year of World's final. I believe the motion was, this House believes that socialism has failed, and indeed at that point in time it probably has failed. We show you that today it would work perfectly well. And what Milan tried to get from me, an example where it does work, I cannot show you one right now because we turned away. This is the whole problem we are facing now. The only socialist countries that exist are dictatorships in essence, and are not socialist countries if you look at the basic idea that is underlying it. So I'm going to show you, firstly, what is the main difference between capitalist and socialist state. Secondly, I'm talking about the year 2013, and thirdly about the incentives a person motivates and drives. Before that, one little thing of rebuttal. The lazy person example, which Philip already mentioned a little. Well, we had these people in factories who were doing nothing. Why? Because there was not enough work. There was not effective planning. They were not put to work. This was the problem. However, there is no difference whether that person sits in a factory on a chair doing nothing, getting money, or sits on a sofa being unemployed, doing nothing, getting money. There is no structural difference, so this makes no point for him. This is an idle point for no side. Okay, what are we talking about in socialism and capitalism? Let's not talk about the worst case, not a dictatorship. Let's also not talk about the best case, utopia. Let's talk about the normal case. In the normal case, if we look at the examples, the sciences were about equal. I mean, the automatic clock, for example, was invented in my home city of Halle in eastern Germany. They were driven just by scientific impulses. They just invented it and sold it to the Japanese because they had to fulfill a 5-year plan. Secondly, we had social, like kindergarten stuff. It was pretty nice. We had education generally. It was also pretty nice. So the whole system worked. The only thing that wasn't equal was economics. Why? Because we had central planning at the top. And they didn't have enough information to make it all happen. The other state, capitalist state, had also central planning, but in smaller units. And these units were competing, and therefore they were better. I'm arguing, if we could make a socialist state where the planning is even more down below, not done at the very central part, but done at the very low part, even lower than capitalism, it would probably win. It would probably be better than the capitalist state right now, because we could incorporate every information and we could beat the capitalist idea where it won in the end. Because the allocation, of resources, sit down Milan, the allocation of resources was done inefficiently. And this was where it lost. The people totally agreed with the basic idea. They were fervent fighters for this idea. They just envied the color TV in the end. This was why it failed, because the pressure on the border was too high. Now, the year 2013, how could we work? Oh no, one last thing.
Free.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so Philip says that socialism is more direct democracy. Borna says socialism is about loving people more. You're telling me it's about individual allocation of resources. What is 2030 socialism? What do you want to
That's my
argue
next
against?
point.
Yeah, well, get on with it.
This is why I announced a structure, Leila. Please ask the point afterwards. Anyway,
Okay.
so socialism remedies the causes. If it is done well, it fights the injustice where it starts. Whereas capitalism, especially welfare capitalism, remedies the symptoms. I believe generally remedying the causes is better. Now, how do we do it in the year 2013? Collaborative working, cooperatives. This is how the internet works. This is where it comes together. Socialism plus internet. This is the magic that would How does it work? Do people do work for free on the internet? Think wisely. How did Wikipedia come into existence? What about the SETI project? What about this new product, the 3D pen that paints in the air? It was a crowd-funded product. These people get together on the internet and they make things happen because not they're getting money for that, because they want to do it, because they have the incentive to do it, which is where I come to the incentive part. The nature of motivation. Lina, you were talking about the individuals were just stuffed somewhere and had no things to do. I grew up in the GDR the first 7 years of my life, and my parents could freely choose where to work, they could freely choose what to study. It was just when the quotas were too much, they couldn't do it anymore. But they would have loved to contribute to the system, and just because their contribution was blocked, because the system was limited, they finally turned away. If we could set up a Wikipedia-like system, where everyone puts their input in, we could develop the motivation for people to actually act. Because what people want is not money. They don't want to be driven by scraping by. People don't want to be driven because they see some food. There's enough food in the world. We don't need this motivation. We don't need to do that. What we do need is mastery. People want to be good at something. Autonomy. They want to be heard if they have something. And they want to have a purpose. And what is better, living in a system which has a purpose of making everyone equal, independent of wealth, independent of anything, but just the ideas count. The competition of ideas on the basic level. This is what we stand for. And we regret that we turned away, because this way we could never see the year 2013 and the internet plus socialism, and this is bad.
Thanks, Speaker, for those remarks. And now I call upon a member of opposition to address the House.
Unlike Marcus, I will publicly admit that I am arrogant, but it's not due to my intellect, it is due to my sex appeal, which was impossible during socialist times. And I will thoroughly go into explaining, I think we went away from the debate. I don't think this debate should be a comparison between socialism and capitalism. I think that we should, really look at what socialism is in theory and in practice, and what the second opposition will prove to you is that A, it failed miserably because the two couldn't collide, B, that it failed miserably in terms of international relationships, and C, it failed miserably because it created the identities of people which were not good for the future of mankind. But before that, just two things I will rebuttal. The first one is concerning the first government saying that that the money is what makes the world go round. Well, that same money was in socialist states. However, the amount of money that you will earn and where you will spend that money was controlled by the state. So they didn't eliminate the money. They just gave you less money than you would get in a non-socialist system. That's number one. Number two is this conception that with internet now we have the liberties and conjoined working force. Well, that's not true, because the internet came to be because people had more free time, and they had more free time because the distribution of wealth was on their behalf. They earned more than they can spend for a month. Thus, they had an incentive to be as creative as possible. While in socialism, you would earn barely enough to survive. Thus, you would not have enough free time to consider being creative, or to consider, making the system better. And that's the major problem. Because in the core idea of socialism, sit down, Philip, is the same as with any absolute authority system. And that goes that if you have an absolute authority, you are not allowed to question it. And when there's something you're not allowed to question, it inevitably leads to corruption. And the only way that system can survive is by, constantly strangling people, asking them for more, and making them feel guilty for the system not working, and not that the system is flawed in itself. But what is the system? The system says that we should all be equal, but it never says how. It sort of outlines that we should be equal in every single way, and we think that that's the biggest flaw of socialism, because we're not equal in every single way. Sit down. The thing is that, there was an experiment in the United States at the end of the 19th century, and 10 people were given the exact same amount of land and the exact same amount of resources. After 1 year, they were completely different in terms of, how much grain they had, how much wealth they had. So in our nature, it would be completely incentivizes for the state to, for the common good and for the greater good, to tell you how much you can earn and how much you couldn't. Philip.
There's always going to be differences, but why is it okay for the average 20-something European that comes out of university to work for free for at least 2 years for someone who earns millions because they're unable to give them 1,000 euros a month away from their own salary?
I'm totally with you on that. However, in that system, that same student is able to say out loud that the system is corrupt and flawed and not being shot, killed, and sent to gulag. Sit down. Now in terms of economical stances, the problem with socialism is that it incentivizes dependency theory, meaning that you know, we will earn as much as, we will create as much as we need. However, the problem with the theory and the practical applications of that is that the government will not even, you know, have the products from different countries, even though they're cheaper, with greater quality, because it feels that it is the sole bearer of responsibilities and authority in a regime. That's the problem number one. And the second problem is with the identities. Because who are you in the socialist regime? You are a part of a working class. You are a working bee. That's who you are. There is no way of you having an ethnicity. There is no way of you being a part of a religious group. There is no way of you being anything besides a part of the working class. Now, what that creates, and we've seen it with the downfall of socialism, is that because you are not allowed to have any form of individual self, you go to the other extreme. And that was one of the major problems, for instance, not only in Yugoslavia, but in Soviet Union as well. Because what it created in return is the mass expansion of nationalism and right-wing extremists. For all those reasons, I beg you to oppose.
Thank you, gentlemen, for those remarks. Now I call upon the government whip to conclude